Look, I know the IRS isn't the most popular agency in government, and it's politically popular by some to take shots at you and your workers. But at the end of the day, the main purpose of the IRS is to enforce the law and serve the American people. And when we try to punish the IRS, as some do, by cutting their budget, it's the American taxpayer that suffers the collateral damage through reduced service and efficiency. According to the National Taxpayer Advocate's annual report to Congress, and I'll quote from it, quote, "The budget environment of the last 5 years has brought about a, quote, devastating erosion of taxpayer service, harming taxpayers individually and collectively." The report goes on to estimate that taxpayers will have to wait at least an average of 30 minutes on hold before they'll be able to speak with someone, and less than half of those calling in will be able to reach a representative. Less than half. Like you, I think this is completely unacceptable. Not to mention that for all who work hard and pay their taxes to support our nation collectively, it really allows those who cheat to get away with it to some degree when you don't have the ability to ultimately enforce the law. So let me ask you, is there any way to reduce wait times and increase customer service by reallocating resources to that critical purpose? And if so, what would be the consequences of reprogramming funding away from other functions?
Our challenge, and we've looked, as I said, at that, trying to be as even and fairly balanced as we can, because enforcement is a big part of our responsibilities, as is taxpayer service. Part of the limitation of saying, well, let's give up on enforcement and turn everybody into answering the phones is that the people who are revenue agents and officers aren't trained to deal with, in fact, call center operations, just as our call center operators aren't trained to become revenue agents overnight. Clearly, we could train them over time. So our judgment has been to kind of lower everything. As I say, we have 5,000 fewer revenue agents, officers, and criminal investigators. At the same time, we have 3,000 fewer people answering the phones, and this year we have 2,000 fewer temporary people available for the phones. So we only have 75% of our budget is people, and they're spread across enforcement, operations, taxpayer service, information technology. So there's no magic hidden pool that we can take that would move some people into taxpayer service that would go unnoticed.
So at the end of the day, people who are calling and trying to find out exactly how to abide by the law, get information so that they can be a responsible filer, get delayed. And those who cheat on their taxes to the detriment of all those who pay may less likely be found out because you have less agents. Is that a fair characterization of what happens?
That's a fair characterization.
Now let me turn to another subject that I am very seriously concerned about, and it's the child tax credit and its refundable portion, the additional child tax credit, which are being criticized based on allegations of fraud. While fraud in any tax program must be addressed, focusing solely on one anti-poverty tax program is threatening to completely deny an economic lifeline to needy children, in my mind, is not a meaningful solution. So there's a lot of talk about combating fraud in the child tax credit, particularly amongst low-income immigrant families. And so I have a couple of questions that hopefully you can answer in short order. Is fraud in the CTC and ACTC a significant contributor to the $450 billion tax gap?
It is not. It's a problem we take seriously, but it is not at the core of the tax gap.
By what percent would the gap be narrowed if there was zero fraud in the CTC program?
It might be narrowed by a percentage.
Mm-hmm. Are unscrupulous tax preparers a significant cause of this fraud?
We are very concerned about unscrupulous tax preparers. As I would stress, the vast majority do a good job, know what they're doing. A smaller percentage of them mean well, but don't know really a lot about what they're doing. And then there's a percentage that are crooks. Mm-hmm. And they are the ones who are a major part of the problem of fraud across the board.
And do you believe that denying the credit to anyone without a Social Security number is merely fraud prevention, or a significant policy change that will deny this important credit to families that are currently eligible today?
No, obviously, we'd love to move everybody off Social Security numbers just to an identity protection pin someday. But at this juncture, the issue of fraud is one that applies to ITINs. It applies to any identifier. People are forever stealing identification information from taxpayers to, in fact, generate fraud.
Well, I'll close, Mr. Chairman, and say I find it interesting that with $450 billion in tax avoidance and fraud occurring every year, some colleagues have focused solely on poor children and families, which make up a mere fraction of the overall problem. In fact, businesses underpaid taxes by approximately $122 billion in 2006 alone, yet we don't seem to hear the same level of outrage in that regard. So I'm for rooting out the fraud everywhere, but at the end of the day, I'm not for denying individuals who legitimately have the right to get the credit, who, because of the way that it's being pursued here, would be denied the right. And I think that that's fundamentally flawed, and there's got to be a better way.